Hi everyone, and welcome back to Getting There the podcast with me, Brogan. On today's episode, we're joined by the fearless and outspoken Dan Wootton. Dan has had an extraordinary journey in the national media, navigating the highs and lows of a high-profile career. We sit down to discuss everything from his experiences in the industry to the controversial topics of cancel culture, vaccine injuries, and everything in between. This conversation is raw, insightful, and sure to spark a thought. Let's get into it. Also, on that note, guys, I am so sorry about the cough. There was nothing I can do. My 3-year-old son's given it to me. I've literally slept upright on a sofa. I'm sorry about the cough, basically. Mr. Dan Wootton, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you, Brogan.
Thank
Great
you
to
for
be
coming.
here.
I know, I've been so excited. I was saying, wasn't I, that obviously I'm like dying, but not dying. I've got this awful flu.
No, and I forced you to come to work.
Well, no, I was so excited, even though I was sitting on my sofa, like bolt upright. And I spent this week kind of studying your life, if I can say that.
Oh.
I was so intrigued. You seem so multifaceted. You've had such an incredible long career, which is obviously now taking a whole nother turn that you probably never saw coming. But for people who don't know you, Dan, I suppose it's good just to give us a little bit at the beginning before we get into the sticky stuff, but just about how you got your career in journalism and coming over from New Zealand.
Yeah, so I was 21 when I moved over to the UK, but I was proudly New Zealand born, but to British parents and British grandparents. So I always had this thing inside of me that knew I wanted to end up on Fleet Street. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a broadcaster. It was a real passion in me. And I had no help. Like, I grew up, great family, don't get me wrong. My parents are teachers, and so were incredibly supportive of me. But, you know, I was from a working class family effectively, and had no connections to this world of journalism or the media or anything. So I came over completely on my own when I was 21 years old, absolutely no money, didn't know a single soul working in the industry, but I just had this ambition that I was going to be a journalist. I was going to end up working on Fleet Street, and I wasn't going to take that job at a bar. And somehow my parents were sending me a little bit of money along the way.
Survival.
And it was survival. I wasn't eating, you know, like I would have a loaf of bread and a container of butter to last me for the week. You know, like I literally had no money because I wasn't prepared to take a job. Lots of Kiwis and Aussies come over and they don't do something in their chosen career. So they work in a bar, or they work in a shop or an office, which is absolutely fine because they're only intending to stay for 2 years, right? Yeah. They call it the OE, the overseas experience. It's like a gap year, really. And then they go back to New Zealand or Australia, and that's when they start their career. But for me, I was like, no. This is where I want to be. So I'm going to have to do this. And eventually, I think it took 8 weeks. But I mean, that felt like the longest period of time. I was so skinny though, Brogan, because I couldn't afford to eat. It was amazing. I lost so much weight. But yeah, I got a job. I got my first job in journalism over here. Oh my goodness. I mean, they hated me and I hated it in the end. But I was working as an editorial assistant at a place called FO Week. And FO stood for Futures and Options. And it was a derivatives trading newspaper. Now, to this day, I'm not good with finance. I'm not good with economics. Do you know about futures and options?
No, but how did you end up there?
Because it was the only job I could get in journalism. And I knew, actually, if I had a job in journalism, it would then lead to other things in journalism. You just need that first job. It's so important.
Need the first step, don't you?
Yeah, because they didn't care about what I'd done in New Zealand. I'd actually had a lot of experience in journalism in New Zealand ever since I was like 15, 16 years old, but they just didn't care. So I needed a job over here. And it was horrible, but it was my first step on the ladder.
Okay. And how did that go?
Well, it went badly, that job. I would literally be talking to hedge fund owners who were worth billions and billions of pounds, but they were horrible to me. They were really horrible to me because I didn't understand that was the issue. I just didn't get it. Even now, futures and options is really confusing. It's like trading on stuff that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So it's not even like normal stock market stuff. But I was useless at economics. I'm bad with money. That's not my strength. But the key thing was it led to another job, which then led to another job at a place called Broadcast Magazine, which was the magazine for the TV industry that all of like the executives and the celebrities and the actors and everything used to read. And so that was when I got my proper start, because I started to meet everyone in the industry who trusted me, who would give me stories. And that led on to
So
me
what were you
entering Fleet
reporting
Street.
then at that magazine?
So it was about the TV industry, but very much the deal side of things. So who's selling this show to what, which show has been cancelled, you know, if Ant and Dec were setting up a company behind the scenes. So it wasn't the consumer stuff, who's dating who.
Yeah.
It was very much like the business
side of
TV.
it.
And yeah, I got to go to Cannes a couple of times a
Did you
year
love
because
it?
they have big TV festivals. I did love it. And it was never about, I mean, I wasn't being paid good money or anything like that, but it was incredible because I got to meet everyone, the people who would actually be making the decisions. And this was 2005, so TV was still a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, there was Big Brother on Channel 4, remember that period?
Yeah, I
and
loved it.
Strictly Come Dancing had just launched, X Factor had just launched. It was a very exciting time in that entertainment world. And then when I got a job offer to move to the News of the World, which was the most controversial newspaper in the
You
UK
must have
at
been
that
so
time.
excited.
Yeah, I was excited, but also terrified. I was 23 years old, and that just had the phone hacking scandal, and so it was a crazy time. But what was amazing is these people in the TV industry, they knew me because I'd worked for Broadcast Magazine, you see, so they trusted me a little bit.
So you got a little bit of credibility as such.
Yeah.
So what was that like, the first day at the News of the World?
Oh, so scary.
Was it?
So scary. The worst thing is they actually made me go in to do like a 3-day trial. So I had to not tell my existing employees that I was going in to try and get this other job at News of the World. And then you had to get a story in the paper, basically, or you weren't going to get the job. And I was up against this other girl who I was actually friends with at the time, or this girl who I was friends with at the time, this woman. And we were competing for this job. But I got a story in my first week. It was only a tiny little story. It was on page 3 of the News of the World. But I remember it was about James May, Richard Hammond, and Jeremy Clarkson from Top Gear. They were on Top Gear at the time of the BBC. Now that would have been front page. That would have got me the job instantly. No, it was much more boring than that. It was about the fact they were getting a big pay rise, I think.
Okay, so how were you getting your information at that point?
But from people who worked in the TV industry. And then actually my first week proper on the job at News of the World, and this is weirdly, all of these years on, probably still the story I'm most proud of because it was so exciting for me. I don't know if you remember, but again, this is in 2007. There was a big scandal in the TV industry about competitions that people were entering,
like
but
X
they
Factor being
weren't
rigged.
able. Not like that. It was like, so you know, on This Morning,
when you ring and you win £1 million. Yeah.
and what they were basically discovering is that loads of these competitions had actually already shut. So people were paying their money to call into the competition, but the competition had closed. So they had no chance of winning.
They were
the
still taking
competition,
everyone's
but they were
money?
still taking everyone's money.
Because it's like £3.50 to ring.
Yeah. So I was told that they were also doing this on the BBC. And you know James Martin, the chef?
Yes, the
James
TV
Martin?
chef, yeah.
So, I mean, I think he hates me to this day, actually, because it was on his show, and it was a show called Saturday Kitchen at the time that he was hosting on BBC One. And I was told, oh, this is happening. But we had one of those absolute bingo moments that you love in journalism where we were looking at his watch and we're like, hang on, this show is meant to be live. I think it was like at 10:30 in the morning. And his watch said that it was 12:15. So we knew that they had
So you're like
pre-recorded
half detective,
this show.
half journalist.
Yeah. And they'd pre-recorded this show the week before. So there was absolutely no chance that you could have entered the competition, but they still left the competition opening. So that was like my first prop story, and I had to go outside James Martin's studio and like try and get him to comment on it.
And did he comment?
No, he was just
So he's
furious
FO?
at me. I mean, I have no idea if he remembers that. I've never come across
But like,
him
it's so
since.
weird. We're going to go on to this bit, but this was probably the first time you were ever exposed to how corrupt this whole media system is. Yeah. Taking vulnerable British public people's money, knowing full well that they have zero chance of winning anything because it's closed.
Totally. I mean, it was actually a genuine scandal when you think about that.
Were you outraged? Like, did you feel the outrage for the public a bit? Or were you just like...
I did, but I think sometimes when you're in a newspaper and you're going for a story, sometimes you don't actually take a step back and think about what you've just said. Whereas now, obviously, my job is to look at these situations, look at these stories that break and think, oh my goodness, like that is so morally corrupt. That is so terrible. Whereas at the time, being completely frank with you, I was just like, I need a story. I need a big story because it's my first week on the job.
That must have got met with a massive round of applause for that, though. First week of the office.
Yeah, no, they were really, really happy. And that kicked off my career.
So what happens next in the career?
So then I was all just about breaking big scoops, breaking big stories. And I was promoted very quickly with the News of the World. I was really lucky in a really random way because I've been asked lots of times, did you ever hack a phone? Because that had been going on.
Yeah, we had, do you know Fran Cutler?
Yeah.
She was on here and she was talking about, obviously,
she's
fallen
hacked,
out,
wasn't she?
Terribly hacked. But which obviously, I know it sounds awful, but when you hear the intricacies of it, like you are thinking that your closest, because that's the way the most privy information would go, your closest, most loved, respected people to you are breaking your trust. You can almost look back and see how these celebrities ended up in an awful way that they were.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, it's absolutely terrible. But just so you know, in 2007, so this is when I joined the newspaper, and I'd got the job at the end of 2006. And at that point, what happened, and it's quite intricate, but people might remember, is the royal editor for the newspaper, a guy called Clive Goodman, he had gone to prison for hacking the phones of Prince William and Harry, or Tom Bradby. It was a combination of those people. And the editor, a guy called Andy Coulson, who would later go on to be David Cameron's chief of staff at number 10 Downing Street, he quit as a result. And we were all assured, and me as a new joiner to the paper, we were assured this was a one-off. They actually used the phrase, rogue reporter. There was one rogue reporter. And so as far as I was concerned, there was one reporter, he'd gone to jail, the editor had resigned, that was it. And so I arrive at the newspaper thinking that was it, it's all over. And it was all over, by the way, because by the time someone's gone to jail, there's no way you're going to risk
risking going to jail.
No story is worth going to jail for, seriously. I've always said I would go to jail to protect a source. I would never stand up in court. If you had given me a story and I had promised you that you were going to stay off the record and you were going to stay a confidential source, if a judge said to me, you're going to jail unless you give up the name of your source, I've always said I would go to jail for that because that's a fundamental principle of journalism.
Do you think they made a big deal out of him because it was particularly the royals? Had it been another celebrity,
yes,
they would have. He obviously felt the wrath of the royals.
100%. But Brogan, it turned out, there was not a rogue reporter. This had been going on. It was like a factory of phone hacking. But I saw none of it. I've only learned all of this after the fact. But of course, I lost my job in 2011 because when this all revealed the extent of how bad it was, News of the World, the newspaper actually shut down. But in a very ironic way, the phone hacking scandal really helped my career.
Interesting.
Because News of the World had relied for the past decade on getting stories by hacking people's phones. So that's how they got these incredible, huge stories. And they were massive stories back in the time. And they also had a guy called the fake sheikh who would dress up as a sheikh and literally trick people into saying terrible things or doing terrible things. So it really helped me because all of a sudden they were not able to break the law. They were not able to hack phones. So they actually needed proper journalists again. And the great thing is because I'd had my experience working for Broadcast Magazine in the industry, I actually knew people, could speak to people, and I got stories the genuine way. And I had to give evidence at the Leveson inquiry, which was the big judicial court process that happened after the News of the World was shut in 2012. And I have said in court, under oath, anyone can go and read my witness statement. I never used a private investigator in my life. I never hacked a phone in my life. I never did anything illegal in the pursuit of the story. And I think about the hacking thing and I'm like, God, what if I'd been there at the time and people were saying, oh, everyone's doing this, everyone's doing this, Dan, so you can do it too. I just know in my core I never would have, because it's the equivalent, isn't it?
Cheating.
Of me, and exactly, like me going into your bag, finding your diary, like if you had an old-fashioned diary that you used to write.
I do.
Reading it. Do you?
Yeah, I love it. I love journaling.
Okay, well, say I got that, reading that, and then publishing a story from that. I would never in a trillion years think about it, because you're completely right. You've used the right word. It's cheating. I believe that you get stories the proper way. So I would never, and it's a very easy thing that has been thrown at me a lot over the years. Oh, you hack phones, you did this, because it's just an easy thing to say to a tabloid journalist, isn't it? And it just is simply not true.
So you were going out there and building relationships. So I suppose you sound like you were literally, I'm not joking here, half detective, half journalist. So these kind of stories must have taken over your life. You eat, breathe and sleep here?
The thing is, then my career changed a lot, because actually, really what I ended up doing, because I became the showbiz columnist at News of the World when I was about 25. And actually, that's a very different world, because you're dealing with celebrities.
I
and
remember
famous people.
reading you on the train when I used to go to work at Morgan Stanley, because you'd give like a little debrief. You did report quite a bit on Harry Styles as well.
Yes. One Direction. That was my era when I was editing the Bizarre column at The Sun. And the Bizarre column at The Sun has a big pedigree. Piers Morgan edited it. And it's like a double-page spread in the newspaper every day, all focused on entertainment.
A little bit
and
gossip.
I loved it. Yeah. And I loved it. And actually, what people don't realise, Brogan, is, every now and then I'd have a row with a celebrity. But on the whole, the vast majority of the stories that I was writing at that time had either come directly from the celebrity themselves, via the celebrity's PR representative or agent or manager or TV executive. And a lot of what you were doing was managing PR and promotion. Plus, the other thing is I interviewed everyone, because actually that's what I love to do. I launched my first podcast when I was at The Sun. And I mean, gosh, don't get me wrong, I don't do celebrity stuff now, but I look back and I do feel really delighted about it, because I got to interview the people who, for me, were big heroes or big fascinating people. Madonna, Paul McCartney, Rihanna, Taylor Swift, people who are genuine stars. Arnold Schwarzenegger, all of those sort of big names. And that was an incredible experience for me. And what you realize is that a lot of what is written about celebrities is managed, and it should be managed.
So do they tell stories on themselves then?
Yes.
Would you pay them for that, for example?
Some, but obviously not Harry Styles or Taylor Swift. That's a whole different thing. If you're writing about them, their team is trying to manage it,
Okay.
Oh, so Taylor Swift's got a new boyfriend, but, she doesn't want this aspect of it mentioned. So you might do a bit of deal.
And they'd say that to you direct?
Well, her team would.
And would you not
say,
like, say, for example, okay, we're making this up, he was a really bad egg. Would you not feel compelled to be like, she's dating him, but he's done this?
Yeah, I mean,
did you listen to their narrative all the time?
Yeah, no, I would always listen, but obviously you would make calls, and I would never be dishonest. But for example, when I think of Taylor Swift, there was a really interesting thing. So I broke a load of stories about Taylor Swift. Do you remember that really famous one where she was kissing Tom Hiddleston?
Yes, I think I do.
And I think the headline was Tinker Taylor snogs a spy, because remember at the time he was in The Night Manager. It was a very famous front page and it went all around the world. And then they broke up and she was dating Calvin Harris. Then they broke up and she was dating this new guy, Joe Alwyn. And I very specifically remember at the time. So I got that story completely independently. It wasn't given to me by Taylor Swift's team. And in fact, I remember speaking to Ed Sheeran about it at the time, and they were very good friends.
Yeah.
And Taylor was very concerned that I had got this story, because
How? Yeah,
and
that was going to be my next question.
Exactly. And it wasn't that she thought hacking or anything like that. It was she wanted to know who within her inner circle knew
such intimate information
and
about
had
her.
betrayed her by giving this information to the media. Now, of course, I protect my sources, so I was very clear to Ed, I'm not going to say who it was. But what was interesting is, and I really liked Taylor at that point. I had interviewed her, when she was a kid. I was the first journalist in the UK to really back her, because I love country music. She was a country star at that time. So, I met her mum, and, we were in it was very different to how things ended up because, you know, by the final time I interviewed her, it was like, you have 7 minutes, you know, you must not ask about this. But the first time it was just me, her and her mum in a hotel room for
Intimate.
an hour getting to know her because she was a news star who was trying to break the UK market. And I was a journalist who at that time
gateway to doing
could
that,
help.
really.
Yeah, exactly. It's changed now. I mean, the newspapers have no influence now, but back then the
Yeah, they were
newspapers
powerful.
had a lot of influence. But just to wrap the story, in the case of when she started dating Joe Alwyn, I remember her people who were obviously very concerned about the fact I had the story, but they made a very specific request that what they didn't want was me to do that thing that a lot of newspapers do with Taylor, where it's like, here's all of the previous men she's dated, which has that little code, doesn't it? Oh, she's a bit of a...
She's, what's it called?
Slag
Friendly, as my dad says.
well, yeah.
My dad goes, no, he's friendly. I'm like, okay then.
And I think, I actually can't remember the details, this is terrible, but I think in that occasion I agreed...
To not do that.
To not do that because I was like, the story is good enough in its own right. I really respect her. We have a good relationship at that point. We did. And so if this is going to upset her, then actually I won't do that. Do you see what I mean?
And then you could jeopardise interviewing her again on like a book launch. So you have to be quite mindful. But I am so interested, Dan. Where are your main sources coming from? And are a lot of people coming to you at that time in order to get money and revenge? And I mean, I guess people had loads of reasons to be coming to you.
But I would say actually not revenge. I never did that sort of journalism. So the thing is, despite what my reputation might be, I never went into this to try and upset someone or ruin anyone's life. I mean, the stories that I was writing when it came to the celebrity world were pretty harmless things. You know, if someone is going to get divorced, that has to be managed. People have to find out about it. Do you see what I mean? So I would try and do that in as respectful a way as possible. Now, that's not to say I'm sure that there are not stories that I've written that the celebrities themselves absolutely hated. And it's funny now because I meet the celebrities in a different context now and they're like, oh my God, I was terrified of you back then. Or they say, my PRs and agents said, I was speaking to a movie star the other day who I've become friendly with. And
Can you tell us who? Come on.
He said, well, I wouldn't want to betray his trust, but he said to me, I was always told, because I used to work on ITV on the Lorraine show, so I was always backstage, and he was like, I was always told to avoid you at any cost.
Quite a powerful man, Dan.
Well, it's so funny, I never saw it that way at all.
Did you find...
Because I was always like, I always felt that I was like begging and pleading people, please do this interview, please come on my podcast, please can I reveal this story? Do you see what I mean? So I never viewed it that way.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you were super powerful in what you were doing, but did you find, and obviously this was what Fran and I were talking about, is that some people would just want to be your friend because of the powers you could assert. So, like, for example, she had it because of the party she was having, but people knew if they busted
She would
you up,
never let me into a party, Frank.
Would she not?
No,
we'll tell her off when I see her.
Because she was best mates with Kate Moss. That's what I remember of her.
We spoke about that.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, yes, is in answer to your question. And obviously, because now I have been cancelled.
We're going to talk about
which I'm sure we'll talk about. Yeah, you realise, unfortunately, how many people were just there because they thought you could do something for them. But I was never naive, Brogan, because remember, I'd been made redundant from the News of the World in 2011, so I'd sort of lost it all then anyway. And so I realised then, okay, these are the people who were only in contact with me because...
Well, I suppose naturally they fade away off your phone book, don't they, as well?
But then I also realised, okay, these are the people who are my genuine friends and they are still going to be here for me regardless.
And did you separate the work and friendship, or did that seem to like come
You would
together?
try, but it's impossible. It was, it is a hard job. Being a journalist where you socialise with your contacts and everything, it can be a very hard job to keep people on side. And unfortunately, in those industries, and this is why, Brogan, when people say, oh, I want to be a celebrity, I'm like, honestly, don't, because I have witnessed that world up close and it is the most toxic world. Most people are just using others in that world. It's sad but true. And you look at celebrities who have been cancelled. I mean, I've really followed the story lately of Armie Hammer, for example, who was the actor in Call Me By Your Name, who was cancelled after a whole... He was cancelled because there were a whole load of allegations regarding his sex life. And
is that not personal, though?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And it's just fascinating to see. He was walking Oscar red carpets, and within a matter of months, every single person has slipped away. And the reason, I guess, I did quite a lot of research into this is because I got the first interview with Kevin Spacey after all of his allegations regarding his cancellation, and Channel 4 was doing this vile hit piece on him, and he wanted to come back. And really, it was the first big interview I got in my new career as someone who's independent, as someone who's been cancelled myself. And in some ways, actually, Brogan, it made me feel better because I'm like, oh my goodness, Kevin Spacey, he's like an Oscar winner. He's one of the best ever actors. Like, even his critics would say, oh my God, he's an incredible actor. He's won Oscars, he's won Emmys, and he lost virtually every friend. Virtually every friend.
But he was found not guilty.
In 2 different jurisdictions. So in America and the UK, he was found not guilty.
But he's never been able to work again.
Not really, no. Not really.
It's
so
tragic,
cancellation
isn't it?
is brutal.
And it's real.
It's real, and it's happened. I mean, in the acting world, you look at Noel Clarke, you look at Armie Hammer. These are all people who are not guilty of any crime. So look, I have certainly done a 180 when it comes to what is sacrosanct and what should be kept private about people's personal lives. But the one thing I would stress, though, Brogan, is that and, you know, if people can find me an example, then I'll have that conversation with them. But aside from a court case with Johnny Depp, which was very much driven by him.
He took you to court, did he not?
Yeah. He sued me and the Sun newspaper. We actually won in court. Amber Heard gave evidence on our behalf, but then obviously it all really collapsed for her in the American case. But again, that was not something I ever wanted, and I've since apologised to Johnny Depp because once I went through my own cancellation and I saw what exes could do to really try and destroy you with lies. And by the way, that's not me making a judgment on the case, but my view on it is that I regretted ever getting involved. But outside of that case, actually, I was never really, you know, I would write stories that people on the whole were
Any
quite
stories
happy
that you regret?
Well, definitely that story.
You could go back.
The Johnny. No, I would not write that story because
for context for people that are listening, what did the story say?
So the story was actually about J.K. Rowling backing Johnny Depp. And I was calling J.K. Rowling a hypocrite for doing so. Now, I actually love J.K. Rowling. Now,
I love J.K. Rowling.
And I think what she's done on women's rights and the whole trans issue is absolutely incredible. But at the time, she was a big proponent of the Me Too movement. Now, I've always had lots of doubts about the Me Too movement. I think it's been used in a lot of cases to cancel men.
And weaponised.
And yeah, it's been 100% weaponised. Cancel men for behaviour that maybe is a bit unseemly, but goes on and is not illegal. And these people lose everything. And they're put in the same category, Brogan, as like rapists and paedophiles. It's nuts.
But like, listen, I remember being at Morgan Stanley and that. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, if the boss would flirt with you,
yes,
and I worked on a trading floor. That's the way it worked.
I mean, if this were to happen in the city,
but it was happening everywhere.
No one would be left.
But also,
and I'm not excusing.
Is this not life?
Well, I don't think
to a degree.
I mean, I don't think it can be life anymore. And this is the bizarre thing with the left in this new woke age, is they have become the moral Puritans, incredibly judgmental. I mean, we saw it happen very recently with Jermaine Genius, who was the Match of the Day host on the BBC, who lost his entire career and was put in the same category as Hugh Edwards.
Let's get to Hugh in a minute.
And it was basically because he had sent some flirty messages to female staff members that he worked with, probably when he was drunk. Now, terrible for his wife.
Awful.
Not at all. None of us condone
But like, come
that.
on, you go through most men's phone, I'm sure there'll be something a little inappropriate.
Yeah.
What do they say? If you go looking for it,
yes,
you'll find him.
And he hadn't had sex with anyone. He hadn't touched anyone. Now, the BBC, this is an organisation, by the way, that has literally shielded Hugh Edwards and Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile, the UK's most prolific paedophile ever. There was a paedophile sex ring operating at the BBC for decades. But when it comes to Jermaine Genius, a footballer who's got a little bit drunk, has sent a flirty text message to a producer, he's dragged through the mud. So all of our priorities have become totally turned upside down.
So talking about the BBC and its corruption and the rings, do you believe that everyone there knew what was going on with Jimmy? They were completely aware?
Yes.
And is that through research of your own?
Yeah, so I did a lot of reporting, especially on the cover-up, because what was so terrible is, and I mean, there was a big report into this, and it's all there in black and white. The BBC tried to cover it up again. They tried to cover up the cover-up. So Newsnight, which is a BBC show, had tried to reveal the information about Jimmy Savile being a paedophile, and the BBC, to save its own ass, had stopped its own journalists from reporting the story. And it was a cover-up, effectively to save the job of the BBC Director General at the time, a guy called George Entwistle, who had to step down. But it was cover-up upon cover-up. And look, I'm looking really closely into this because there's a lot of unanswered questions about the BBC for decades. I mean, there was literally, so the guy who was responsible for all of the BBC's car service, and that was a big deal at the time because people would be picked up. They didn't use
back
companies.
and forth all day.
Yeah, and it was done within the BBC. Now, he was a prolific paedophile himself, and he had huge power within the BBC because he was able to send cars to places, cover for presenters who were getting up to this illegal activity. And Jill Dando, who was the host of Crime Watch and ended up murdered on her doorstep, and her killer, Levi Balfour, was wrongly convicted.
So that means the killer's out there somewhere?
Yes, and I have spoken to friends of Jill Dando. This is not a completely new theory, by the way, who suggests that she was murdered after attempting to uncover this paedophile ring within the BBC. Now, surely we need to know more about that. There's been no proper investigation into that, and I think it's just utterly disturbing.
Well, let's get to it then. MSN. How much of it can we believe? Like, you've been at the forefront of the media, the machine, the everything for, 20 years now? Yeah. How much of it can we believe? And listen, I follow this kind of stuff quite closely because I believe that we're being sold and told an awful lot of things. But I guess my main question is as well, a lot of people talk about the dark forces and the matrix and the powers that be, and the people that are covering up the Jimmy Saviles. Like, any moral man or woman with a good moral compass would want to expose or see somebody like Jimmy imprisoned. What do you believe these powers are that are sitting behind this MSN, and what do you believe their reason for acting like this is?
So I guess when it comes to my personal story, I became completely disillusioned with the mainstream media after the Brexit referendum.
Tell us more.
So 17.4 million people in the UK voted to leave the European Union, right? It was a vote that was announced as one chance. One chance. If you vote to leave, we're leaving. And I was working at The Sun as executive editor at the time, but I was still focused at that point on the showbiz and the entertainment side of things. But after what happened following the Brexit referendum, I very, very quickly wanted to move over to the news side of things. And I did. I got my show on Talk Radio. I got my news column in the newspaper. I left the Lorraine show, all of that type of thing. And it was because I was so completely horrified to see the entire deep state, and by the deep state, I mean the civil service blob, the globalist forces from globalist organizations, so the EU itself, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and the mainstream media in the UK try to subvert democracy, in the most appalling fashion. I mean, remember, this was trying to overturn the biggest ever Democratic vote in British history. And it came so close to happening. I mean, we forget that now. Before Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, there were so many times that Brexit nearly didn't happen, despite that vote. And actually, our current Prime Minister in the UK, a guy who I call Slippery Starmer, Keir Starmer, some people call him two-tier Keir now.
He can't have long left. We'll get into that.
He led it. He led the charge. He was actually the guy under Jeremy Corbyn who was advocating for the overturning of this referendum. So I know some people might be listening to this and thinking, oh, it's quite boring. It's like, no. This was so disturbing. So I guess if there was ever a moment where I became, and I hate this word because it has negative connotations, but I can't think of a better word. If I became radicalized.
Oh, I was going to say when I woke up.
Oh, well, no. So
because sometimes we feel like we're asleep and then we wake up.
Yeah.
There's certain things we just can't unsee.
Well, do you know what? That is such a better term than radicalized, because radicalized makes it sound as if I'm some sort of extremist. No. I just wanted this democratic vote to be seen through. And so I absolutely woke up. And once you're awake to what is going on and to the forces of the deep state and how close the media establishment and the elite all work in lockstep together. They are all mates. They all think the same. They all socialize with the same people. And by the way, they look down on the working classes. And remember, my family from the UK are working class families. My dad's side are miners from South Shields. My mum's side, black cab drivers from Essex. I mean, we were a working class family. And I am so proud of that heritage, even though I was born in New Zealand. And to see the way the establishment looked down at these people with disdain because they wanted Brexit and they wanted sovereignty. And we were ignored in so many ways. So that was my big wake-up moment. But I guess when things then really changed for me was 2020. And it was through a whole conversion of events. But I had...
So where are you working, just so we can paint the picture now?
So basically...
Let's go into 2020 COVID.
Yeah, so exactly. So I'd had an incredible little period with my career. So I'd left the Lorraine show. I'd moved away from entertainment. I was writing a news column in The Sun. I had just broken the story of Megxit, which was Harry and Meghan leaving the royal family. Which
Love the name. Did you come up with that?
Yeah, we came up with it. I mean, I can't
you should have
claim
copyrighted that. Can you
credit,
copyright
but it was on my story. No,
you should have in your bio on Instagram. Megxit creator.
Yeah, no, that was a cool moment. And so, you know, I things were going incredibly well for my career in the mainstream media, and I got offered this job as the weekday drive time host on talk radio, replacing Eamon Holmes, which was a really big deal. I wanted this. I really wanted this show. And so I took that job. And that was in February 2020. Well, literally within a month, the whole UK is locked down. The whole world has gone completely mad. And I just so happen to be, even though I have no particular experience in this area, but I guess I'm a liberty guy. I'm very much focused on liberty and free speech and freedom of expression and the right to choose. And I become, I guess, one of the most vocal proponents, certainly in the mainstream media, of anti-lockdown to begin with, leading on to anti-mandate, leading on to, oh my God, the whole world has gone insane.
Batshit crazy.
Yeah, batshit crazy. And this has become, throughout 2020, a personal mission of mine. This is all I care about. I don't give a damn anymore about who's dating who, celebrities, showbiz. I don't care. That doesn't matter. I'm literally seeing tyranny all around me. And for me, it was very personal because I was literally locked out of New Zealand where my mum is, my dad is, my sister is for over 2 years. I had, that was a whole other story. So I see this tyranny developing and I know it's not true. And I know this virus is not something that we should be scared of. I got it in March 2020. It wasn't pleasant, but so then I became an advocate for something called the Great Barrington Declaration, which was all about a different approach. You end lockdowns, but you protect the vulnerable, and this is how the world can get back together. Well, I was derided that year as an extremist, I had Chris Bryant, who's one of the top Labour ministers now, come on my show. He literally described me as a nutcase because I believed in herd immunity. Like, herd immunity is a scientific fact.
It's a thing. That's how we got polio vaccinations
exactly,
and everything.
So I see the whole world go mad. And if you'd said that, I guess, Brexit woke me up, at this point, I all of a sudden am truly a man on a mission. And as part of that, Brogan, I lose complete faith in the mainstream media because I see these journalists and these editors who previously I respected, and I'm like, oh my God, not only are you swallowing lies, swallowing fear, pushing fear, pumping propaganda to your viewers and readers, which I actually found really sick, you're taking money from the government in order to do it.
Have you seen the doctors that have all come forward now? They were being paid.
Yeah, but so were the newspapers, Brogan. Like, literally.
So this is my question.
And the radio stations and the TV stations, all of the ads were just paid for by the government. So they were all part of this. And some of the TV stations, like my former employees at ITV Daytime, who literally made me sick over that period, what Good Morning Britain was doing, it was revolting. Do you remember this morning?
Were you vocal about this then?
Yeah.
Where though? Where's letting you on a media platform be vocal?
So that was the thing. So I had my column in The Sun and I had my show on Talk Radio. Now, Talk Radio was a little haven of sanity. But what I could see happening was that by the end of the year, they were all getting a bit sick of me doing this. So my columns in The Sun, my bosses would be saying, oh, Dan, can you just stop writing about lockdown? And I'm like, are you kidding me? So that led to a big change in my career because after 2020, that was when I made the decision to I was the first presenter signed to host on GB News, which was a news station which was all about free speech, or was meant to be about free speech. Yeah. And I also moved to work for the Daily Mail Online. And that was because I was working for an incredible editor who absolutely believed in anti-lockdown policies in a way that they didn't at The Sun.
Well, it sounds like such an interesting time moving on to the GB News stuff, but just sticking with the COVID. So I'm assuming you're unvaccinated.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't ever discuss my status.
Okay, question then. So,
and I don't think anyone should have to.
Okay, what do you think the reason, like we're saying that it's been proven time and time again, it's a bad strain of flu and they're pushing on people to be locked down and isolated and everything else. Let's go back to the puppeteers and the powers that be. What do you believe their reasoning in doing that is? Is it a control thing? What do you think they were making people do that for?
I mean, I guess the
driving of the fear.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I say is a huge amount of this was down to incompetence, not conspiracy. Like, I really do believe that. But the problem is it shows how quickly something can snowball and how quickly dissent can be silenced, and actually how quickly most of the population will just swallow it as well. And that's terrifying. And the problem is, especially these big globalist organizations, so the World Health Organization, which is just the most corrupt, disgusting body run by this crazy guy called Dr. Tedros, who, you know, Donald Trump pulled America out of it, but immediately once he was out of office, the funding went back in. The United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and Tony Blair, like, what they saw is, oh, wow, the West are going to go for population control. All of these things that we thought previously were only possible in a country like China, communist, social credit scheme, all of that. We can roll this out to the rest of the world. All we have to do is terrify people. And remember, so much of those early days of COVID were propaganda. I mean, basically, one hospital ward in Italy, which was apparently overrun. I don't even believe it was overrun. I don't believe any of these hospitals were overrun. I mean, look, there were huge Nightingale hospitals.
Do you not remember that one? It literally just looked like an old years ago war zone, like a bomb shelter.
And no one was in it.
All these bits. No one ever got used.
No one was in it. And so I actually don't believe any hospitals were overrun or any morgues were overrun. Don't get me wrong. The first few weeks were scary, but actually what needed to happen, if you look at this scientifically, is protect your loved ones. You know, if you've got an 80-year-old grandmother at your home, you keep her in the bedroom, You keep her away from people, do whatever you can. But actually, you know what needed to happen? The young people needed to go out and they needed to get it.
Yeah.
And millions more people were killed. Elderly people were killed because there was no herd immunity in the population. And that's why people like Boris Johnson in the early days were talking about actual COVID parties where young people would go out and purposefully get infected with COVID. And he was presented in the mainstream media as a granny killer. So the problem is, when you're trying to go against a narrative like that, it's a snowball effect. It's very difficult. It's really difficult. I mean, it took a huge personal toll on me, for example, and I'm not even a politician.
Yeah, because people would have been like, you're, like we said earlier, like absolutely batshit crazy.
Yeah, you're disgusting.
Yeah, like we didn't lock down.
You're just doing it because you don't want to go to a restaurant.
Oh, yeah, like we didn't lock down. And they'd be like, it's going to be your fault that someone's mum or dad's sister's cat's neighbour died. But you said you're a man on the mission and you went really in, you got quite involved in the COVID vaccination injuries, didn't you? You researched into that a lot. And what did you find? And what did you find as like the most heartbreaking things that were happening to people?
Well, so again, for me, this is very similar to the Brexit situation. It was about the demonisation of a group of people who had done the right thing. And remember, it's so ironic. These people are described as anti-vaxxers. It's like, do you know how stupid that is, mainstream media? They took the vaccine.
Yeah.
They're injured because they took the vaccine.
Yeah.
And so I was one of the first people to actually have the vaccine injured on my show. You know, Alex Mitchell, incredible guy from Scotland, lost his leg because of the AstraZeneca vaccine. He, to this day, I mean, he can't work. He was a scaffolder. You know, all of these stories struck me. And
have they been what's it called? Not contemplated. Lost the word. No, they've been compensated. Sorry.
Yeah.
Told you didn't feel well.
I mean, honestly.
But what's the situation? Because I don't feel like you hear about this.
No. And the compensation scheme is really terrible. I mean,
well, nothing can compensate for your leg.
No.
Let's have it right.
No, I mean, £100,000 is not going to compensate for losing your leg, but it's also certainly not going to compensate for losing your husband. You know, I've spoken to wives, COVID vaccine widows, but their stories are terrible. I wanted to put them on TV, and I did. Huge pushback from the regulators and all of that around it. And I appeared on the Big GB News Victims of the Vax special, which was driven by a guy called Mark
So this
Stein.
is where you aired it. You aired it all on GB News.
and on my show. But it was
what
driven...
an exciting project, because it's like a personal... It's obviously like a bit of a personal story of yours and all these other people, and it being relevant and pushing it on a new channel.
And they had no voice. But it's really telling, isn't it, that both myself and Mark Stein are both off GB News, and GB News hardly talks about the victims of the vaccine now, even though it's such a big story. But for me, it was much more about a story of demonization and mainstream media cover-up. So the idea was, if you talk about a victim of the vax, you are somehow doing down the entire project and you're being irresponsible. And it's like, no. Reporting the truth, how can you ever be irresponsible? That is the job of a journalist. Now, that's not to say that we could put and did put in certain caveats. So all the time, this is why the Ministry of Health says that you should be vaccinated. Here's how many people they claim that it saved. All of that stuff.
So you were giving counter-information on GB News?
Always, because there are rules in
and who are
the
rules
mainstream
coming
media.
from?
So they're coming from an organisation called Ofcom. Now, I actually call Ofcom the Off-Communists because they are a despicable organisation that censor
everything.
Broadcasters, especially from the Conservative perspective. And over COVID broken, it was like they were on speed. They literally sent notes around saying, you are unable to challenge the official government narrative. Well, how ludicrous, because do you remember the official government narrative, for example, when it came to masks, at the beginning was don't use masks, they're useless, you don't need them. Then total 180, masks are all going to save your life. I mean, no one hated masks more than me. I despised those things.
Even like, I'm no scientist here, Dan. You're going to wear this mask. Even if you have got COVID, you're reinfecting yourself. Everyone knows you want fresh air and freedom. You're leaving that somewhere else that's infected.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it just totally...
It did nothing.
And obviously this whole climate change bollocks, we're absolutely polluting the world with masks.
Yeah.
None of it makes
No.
sense.
And the thing is, what was so crazy to me is it's like these scientists went mad. And you actually realize you can never trust these people because they would not have us going out of the house now when you have a common cold. I mean, this was the problem. They literally believe in a controlled society.
Party in a phone box.
Yeah, and it's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. So, yeah, so that was crazy. And absolutely, I think what it's done, to come back to your broader question, what it's done is strengthen the deep state. Because all of a sudden, these globalist organizations know, oh, actually, if we scare people enough, then they'll do things we never thought they would do. And the fear is that leads towards things like digital ID, digital currency.
Everything that's happening in China.
Cashless societies. Exactly. And then you get towards a Chinese social credit scheme, which is where you are effectively judged for decisions you make. You might get points if you take certain vaccinations, for example, and you might get deducted if you don't. But even more terrifying than that, you might get points deducted if you post something on X, a free speech platform that goes against the narrative.
I can't believe this is real. So we had this guy on yesterday. His name's Trey. He's like one of the original crypto kings, but he's very much into this conspiracy. And he was sitting in that exact seat telling me the exact same thing you're saying about China. They walk across the road and in order to shame them, their credit score comes above them.
Yeah.
Do you think we're far away from this in the UK? Do you think that's the aim?
I think a version of it is absolutely the ultimate aim, because what you've got to realize is these people don't want us to own anything, and they will use nut zero, as I call it, or net zero, as they call it, as an excuse why you can't own your house or put air conditioning in or drive a car. There's a war on motorists, or catch a flight. I mean, it's really chilling stuff, and that is why we have to fight back. I don't think people realize, and COVID, don't get me wrong, I don't think it was planned or planned by the West. I think absolutely, I believe in the lab leak theory. I was propagating the lab leak theory in 2020. Exactly. This was a Chinese plan, or at the very least, a Chinese plan gone wrong, which they then used to weaken the West. But the problem was the West allowed itself to be weakened.
To succumb to it all.
Yeah, and, there's always been propaganda units within governments. I mean, look back at World War II. Of course, it was necessary to pump out propaganda to try and convince the population
to fight.
Yeah,
and everything else.
To fight, and we were doing the right thing. And even, but right down to don't eat too much bread, because...
That's how cereal came along as well, because that's more profitable.
Exactly. So, and you could argue that given that war was a battle of survival versus Nazism, that it was worth it. But the problem is those sorts of nudge tactics are much more sophisticated now. And
subliminal.
Subliminal, yeah. And look at what it was used for. I mean, it was literally used to scare people from being anything other than this close to each other. Now, I think all the time, how do people not look around now and think, oh, so the government's completely fine now for us to be packed in like sardines on a tube carriage in London? That's fine now. Do you see what I mean? It's like COVID hasn't gone away, just like the flu never went away. It was never going to go away. So I hope people, and I think, don't get me wrong, I think a lot more people have woken up, and I think a lot more people have woken up when they see vaccine injuries on their friends and family members who were not people who were quote unquote anti-vaxxers, But unfortunately, people are going to be, or maybe it's fortunate, but people are going to be a lot less trusting of the system now. And I think it in so many ways. I mean, I was very naive for years during my time in the mainstream media about lots of things. I mean, I would believe that in the UK, if you called 999, that you'd have an ambulance at your house within
a minute or two.
15 minutes. Yeah. No, we are on our own. And I think that's a shocking realization. You know, you get your house burgled, you get your phone stolen, you get beaten up. The likelihood is nothing is going to happen.
I'll tell you an interesting story. I do this charity event, and I did it last week actually, so it's quite interesting, but not. And we do it at this rugby club. Anyway, we do this big inflatable golf course. And when I left, the lady was quite upset who runs it. And I was like, what's wrong? And she's like, I've got some really sad news. You see the changing rooms over there. There are children's changing rooms that come and play rugby. And they were broken into the other night, and a local crackhead had gone in, left needles on the floor, broken into all the lockers, stolen loads of stuff. They go in the next morning, ring the police. The police are like, come down like a day or two later. Meanwhile, they've cordoned it all off. Police come in, try and open the door, and it's locked. And she's like, it can't lock from the outside. Someone's in there. So the crackhead's gone back in. The police are in there. He's high as a kite, got all of these stolen stuff, wearing the children's clothes. He's got a big elastic band on his arm, paraphernalia all over the floor. Can't arrest him because he was just sleeping and it was technically already broken into before, and he did nothing wrong. All he did was trespass, but they're not going to arrest him for trespass. But you're allowing they were talking with here, as close as you and I are, but he was not guilty. Yeah. And she said, for these young children I work with who are in this vulnerable area, like because it's in a park, but it's not only that, you're leaving that person out to do similar behaviour to someone else that might not have ended up in a secure place that is a room. Do you know what I mean? Because they're off their head too. And she was like, it just worries me. Like, what? How can I look after these children?
It's the breakdown of society, isn't it? This is the problem. It is a fundamental breakdown of society. Once you realise that the authorities are not going to be there for you, it's terrifying because the criminals, the bad guys, also know.
No one's coming to save you.
100%. And the problem is what we've seen in the UK over the past few weeks is actually two-tier justice on speed.
No one's coming to save you, and also the bad guys realise no one's coming to save you.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen over the past few weeks, since Keir Starmer was elected Prime Minister of the UK, that actually the two-tier justice is so egregious. Now, look, I've always known, Brogan, this has been going on for such a long time. So the police very often only care about crimes that are politically sensitive. So if, for example, the mainstream media is reporting on something, then they might get involved. And we saw this the other day, and it's a small example, quite similar to the story you just told. But I think it really matters. So
Hugh Edwards.
No, not that. No, it was the young waitress at Nando's.
Oh my God, that was awful.
Yeah.
That got hit in the face.
She got hit in the face by an Asian guy. Now, she was mixed race herself, so this wasn't like a race issue.
That's probably why it didn't get
but the police were at Nando's at the time. They were literally at the Nando's. She has the CCTV footage, which has now gone viral, and the police are, oh, sorry, nothing we can do. So a waitress is attacked in Nando's. Now, what's worse is the police only launch an investigation into the crime.
After the national outcry.
After it goes viral. And this is what happens so often because the police care so much about what is written about them in the media. So, for example, with these so-called riots, and I say so-called riots for loads of reasons.
Yes, I want to talk about that.
Yeah, but basically, the so-called riots, all of a sudden, people are being banged up for 3 years for posting on X. And of course, all of these people are white, working classes, the types of people who the establishment has disdain for, Brexit voters, people who are quite rightly furious about mass immigration, and actually were just so angry about the fact that they had seen 3 young girls stabbed to death at a Taylor Swift
Do you know how he was trying to kill
class.
them? Because I've got some friends down in Liverpool, and in a lot of the reporting, it's like there's like 8 others critically ill because he was trying to behead them all. So that's why all of the injuries were like lacerations on the necks and the shoulders. And that's why everyone else was so critically ill. And then they post a picture of him as a schoolboy.
Yeah, it just doesn't bear thinking about. And this is the problem with our justice system because you're told So it happens, and you're told, oh, no, you can't talk about how this has happened because that would be really disrespectful to the grieving relatives. Then you're told, well, actually, we can't talk about it because he's now been charged by the police and it could jeopardize him receiving a fair trial. And then after the riots, Keir Starmer says, oh, well, no, we can't talk about it now because otherwise we'll just be looking as if we are approving of the people who were rioting. So effectively what happens in these crimes all the time, and I think a lot about the case of Thomas Roberts. I interviewed the guy's dad, and he was the 21-year-old on a night out in Bournemouth, aspiring Royal Marine, stabbed to death by an illegal immigrant who had committed a double murder on the European continent, but got no checks when he came into the country. This guy is in his mid-20s, from Afghanistan, claimed that he was 14 years old, so was put in a school with other teenagers. He goes and he kills Thomas Roberts, a guy with his whole future ahead of him, a fiancé, ambitions for a career in the Royal Marines. And what happens? The establishment refuse to grant the family's wish for a proper inquest into what happened because they say there were no systemic failures. And it's like, I've looked into this case, there was systemic failure after systemic failure. But what happens is that the mainstream media move on. So, you know, by
it's
the
like
time...
Tommy Violence, the Unsilenced documentary. I assume you've watched that. Cover up after cover up. Every single teacher was paid £18,000. I think he had 11 and 12 disciplinaries, including attacking girls with hockey sticks and saying to guys that he was going to rape their sisters.
Yeah, but if you're going against the narrative, you can't discuss it. And there's always a way. So, I mean, Tommy Robinson, for example, has been silenced by the civil courts. So there are always ways to silence these things. And I don't believe in our justice system. I do not believe in it. Because in America, it's not perfect, but there is transparency over these things, which means the authorities give a load of information. We can have the debate. I mean, right now, if we were to have a genuine debate about the guy who is charged with killing the 3 young girls at the Taylor Swift concert, you know, we could literally be arrested and sent to prison for contempt of court. We are not allowed legally to have that debate. And it doesn't matter if we're doing it on the mainstream media, if we're doing it on an independent podcast. I cannot sit here and say, this is what I've heard about him, this is what I've heard about his background.
So journalism doesn't exist anymore?
Well, it exists only within the system that the establishment has put in place, and the establishment has put that system in place to try and control dissent. Now, I think it's going to fail, and I have a lot of hope because we have a guy called Nigel Farage in Parliament now. He is pushing for genuine reform. Now, for someone like Tommy Robinson, Nigel isn't going far enough, but it's a big change. Having a party like Reform in Parliament is a big change. And basically, I am a big believer that we have to smash what I describe as the uni-party system. So that's Labour and the Conservatives that have pretty much done everything the same way for years and years and years, and they're protected in this country. And again, I'm sorry if this is too political, but they're protected in this country by the first past the post system, which means that there's no proportional representation. So Reform UK get millions more votes than the Liberal Democrats, but they end up in Parliament with 5 MPs, yet the Liberal Democrats, who play the system, end up with 72 MPs. So we need proportional representation, which just means if you vote for Reform UK, no matter where in the country you are, your vote counts because it's based on a percentage system. Yeah, I do.
Do you believe
I do, but I have concerns about specific aspects of the system. So for me, postal voting is absolutely corrupted in this country. It should be banned unless you are incredibly ill or serving in the military overseas or in hospital for an operation. Go and vote on the day, in person, on paper, because you've got 12 hours. No, more than 12 hours. The polls open in the UK at 7 in the morning and they close at 10 p.m. at night. You can make it to a polling station. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Postal voting has been corrupted. You only have to look at George Galloway's election, for example, recently in the by-election, Or what's going on around the place in East London where I used to live, Tower Hamlets, where there is corrupted election after corrupted election. But I do not believe that we can give up on democracy. Absolutely not. We have to improve our system, though. We have to reform our system, because the problem is I live in a part of London where it's always going to be Labour, right?
Yeah.
So my vote is wasted. I get one vote in 5 years, right? And it's wasted. We should be so angry about that.
So do you think we should start reorganising the way we can vote then?
Yes. Yeah. So it's very, very simple. It happens in loads of countries around the world, including Germany, including New Zealand. And it is a system where you vote for your local MP to represent you in Parliament, but you also vote for your party, the party that you believe in, that you want to become government, the party that you want to have the Prime Minister, the one that really makes the decision. And then what happens with that, Brogan, is the vote is broken down. So if Reform UK gets 20% of the votes in the election, they get 20% of the MPs.
Yeah.
It's really simple.
So there'll be a lot of people listening to this and waking up from their slumber themselves, but also listening to the incredible stories that you've spoken about here, Dan, and maybe actually somewhat feeling pretty powerless. So how can we, you mentioned it earlier, you know, like about like perhaps fighting or like uniting rather. How can people do that in a way that that's seen and heard? And do you think it can be seen and heard? Because there is a shift coming.
There is. I mean, look, lots of people have different strategies on this. So I've canvassed a lot. So Tommy Robinson, Father Calvin Robinson,
he's coming on.
Oh, great, great. And he appears on my show each week.
Does he? Okay. I'll tell him you're on.
Yes, and he's a brilliant guy, really brilliant guy. And Douglas Murray, who you should definitely get on.
I've been emailing guys.
He's an amazing
Do you follow Ella Colabon?
No.
We're going to get her on. She's massive.
Okay, good. I need to
okay, she's in LA though, but she's coming out.
But yeah, Douglas Murray, they believe that constant peaceful protest is the way forward. Now, personally, I'm a bit with Nigel Farage on this. I absolutely respect the right to protest. Go right ahead. I absolutely respect, as long as it's peaceful and as long as you're not doing what Insulate Britain did, for example, and blocking motorways, which are actually stopping people getting to hospital and killing people. Like, that is wrong. But peaceful protest, go right ahead. Personally, I don't think it's the solution, though. I don't think it's going to change anything.
What do you think?
I don't believe in getting to the streets on a personal basis. So for me, it's all about democracy. It's all about getting our voice heard. So that means backing political parties and political movements that can make an actual difference and speaking about it nonstop. Do you know the one thing that politicians cannot ignore? Opinion polls, because they're out of a job if they do.
Yeah.
And it's the one thing that creates genuine change. But the problem is our system is rubbish. And the two parties protect the system. The Conservatives and Labour protect the system. They basically pass power to each other. They've passed power to each other for the last 90 years. It's wrong. And so what we need is a party that wants genuine reform. And it was really interesting. Michael Sheen, the actor, who's a hard left actor, and I can't stand Michael Sheen. I can't stand his political opinions. But I will always give credit to someone when they make a point that I agree with, no matter where on the political spectrum they are. And he appeared on the Newsagents podcast the other day, which I also despise. That's the one with Emily Maitlis and John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. It's awful. But he made such a good point. He was like, the UK is now a multi-party system, but we're straitjacketed and we're desperately trying to burst out of that system because the system is not fit for purpose.
It's not serving us anymore.
No, having one vote every 5 years. 5 years of this. Absolutely not. No other major democracies have to wait 5 years.
The UK will be beyond recognisable in the next 5 years.
It's too late.
So for people who are literally listening to this now, where would you tell them to start then?
Well, I never tell people what to vote for, but what I do, and this is where I'm very different to other journalists who are dishonest and corrupt, by the way, because they pretend that they're unbiased, but they are the biggest biased journalists, but they pretend that they have no political views when we all know they're in the tank for Labour most of the time. So what I do is I talk about my own personal experience. So during Brexit, I absolutely supported Boris Johnson, and then I following that supported Liz Truss, and I believe that she was got rid of in a deep state coup and blamed for all of the problems that actually had nothing to do with her. So that's a whole other story. But as soon as Fishy Rishi, as I called him, the globalist prime minister, was literally installed on us in a coup, I was done with the Conservative Party. So for me personally, at the last election, I voted for Reform UK and I supported Nigel Farage, and I believe that Nigel Farage can be Prime Minister in 2029. Is Nigel Farage perfect? Of course he's not. Now, I was his colleague for 3 years. I worked with him at GB News. He's actually a very decent man. He's a good human being. Unlike most of my colleagues at GB News, he stood by me over that period. He spoke to me regularly when everyone else was washing their hands of me. But is he perfect? No, he's not perfect. Is Donald Trump perfect? No. But they are charismatic leaders who can drive a movement, and we need a movement in this country. And the thing is, what Nigel is proposing is a genuine reform of the country. So he is genuinely talking about changing the electoral system, of scrapping the House of Lords, all of that sort of stuff. And that's what's required.
So that's where we've got to start.
So for me, that's where I'm going. But the other thing is, talk, speak up, and I'm not just saying this for selfish reasons for both of us. Support the independent media.
Yeah.
Turn off the mainstream media. They are lying to you. They have been lying to you for the last 10 years at least, if not more. Support independent media ventures. In America, it's changed the whole country. Like, I'm so inspired by the big American media stars, Tucker Carlson, Dan Bongino, Dave Rubin, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, all brilliant. Doesn't mean I agree with everything they say. PBD's another one. But they have such a big voice. So why are you getting home, paying your license fee, turning on the British Bashing Corporation or Woke ITV or Sly News? Turn them off, support the independent media. Not just me, there's loads of other people in the UK who are doing it. We are going to tell you the unvarnished truth, because I am no longer hired by billionaire media moguls, and I'm no longer regulated by the off-communists.
And also, I think something you've touched on a few times, you've actually mentioned it, is you will give credit to someone if you agree in an aspect of their view. And I think what we forget is, Dan, we're not meant to agree on everything. No. You can like someone and not agree with their political views. And you can take pieces from people, like you're saying about these people in America and stuff. And I think we get so caught up in the UK that we're told it's either black or white, it's Labour or it's Conservative. And
why do you want to cancel?
Over here somewhere.
Yeah, and why do you want to cancel your rivals? Like, that is nuts. So if you took two people in the country who I probably disagree with most, Jeremy Corbyn and Owen Jones, right? I don't agree with any of their political philosophy. I actually think a lot of what they say is truly dangerous. The last thing I want is for them to be deplatformed. That's lunacy.
Yeah.
No, they deserve their platform. Daylight is the best disinfectant. Let's have the debate. And actually, when Owen Jones's outfit, Novara Media, was taken off YouTube and demonetized, I campaigned for it to go back on, even though I disagree with everything they do politically. Do you think anyone on the left was campaigning for me when my free speech was taken away?
I had the same thing with Tommy. I gave a disclaimer saying, it doesn't mean I agree in his views. And
you shouldn't even have to do that.
I shouldn't. And I was made to. And when I do it again with anyone, no one's getting a disclaimer, because I will talk. It's my show. I'll talk to who I want to talk to. And
but also, you having me on does not mean that you agree with everything that I say.
We're having a conversation, right? And someone wrote on my page, and I wrote back, and it actually got loads of people ended up reposting it, but they said, you're wrong for ever giving this man a platform. And it was actually a friend of mine. And I said, I don't agree. By silencing people, it makes these issues go away. And there were some things he educated me on and I was quite interested in. But some other parts I thought, well, that's not right. And that's okay. Not everyone's going to be the whole picture.
No. And also, you're just losing an argument. I mean, good luck trying to silence Tommy Robinson and Andrew Tate. They're not going to be silenced now. It's not going to happen. So you can try all you like, and the media can keep trying to fight yesterday's battle. I mean, look at what they did to Russell Brand, for example. The moment that he turned against their narrative, they cancel him. The moment that my show on GB News was asking too many tough questions, was challenging too many people, they cancel me.
We're gonna
and
get
they
onto that
cancel me with a relish. So there are things people can do. And one of those things that people can do is support independent voices, but also fight up any time free speech is challenged, not just when free speech is being taken away from your enemies.
Right? How fucked up is this? I'm doing an event, you know with who.
Yes.
And in the background of the event, there's a British flag because I am British, they are British. We're holding it in the whole heart of Shoreditch, Dan. Yeah? I got told by people, oh, I don't know.
And was it the Union Jack or the St. George's flag?
Jack, yeah. Oh, because people might think you're far right. And it's like...
It's ludicrous.
What the fuck? My grandparents fought in the war and I am not allowed to have a flag. Do you know that you probably do know? You know well more than me. That's why you're here. That the black taxis in London are not allowed to wave the flag. But you see everyone coming through with the Palestinian massive ones.
Or the Ukraine flag. No one was trying to take that down.
And it's like, whoa, and what people try and do is, and I've been experiencing it recently, Dan, like try and scaremonger me that I'm going to be put into a box by having a conversation. That's all you and I have done today is have a conversation. And all I've done is create a flyer that has got a sense of, you know, British sovereignty in it. And I'm then going to be deemed far right. And people love, I've never been called this, but it's like people like to call Tommy a racist because what does that do? It silences him. It puts him in a box because anybody with a moral compass would never speak to a racist. So they try and put these labels on people to stop us from even having these conversations.
Well, yeah, and now the really terrifying thing, and this is certainly designed to shut down people like Tommy Robinson, is they're talking about making Islamophobia illegal. This is the Labour government. Now, I say to them, as a gay man, I have huge issues with this religion. I have spoken to people.
You would be killed.
Yeah. And I mean, I've spoke just this week to a gay man who was a radical Islamist. He was raised in this country. He wasn't born overseas and then imported here. He was born and bred in the UK, but he was radicalized as a youngster and he grew up as a youngster. He realized he was gay at about 8 years old. But he was told by British Muslims that any gay person needs to immediately be thrown off the top of a building. Now, this current government is going to criminalize me criticizing this religion, which literally wants to push me off the top of a building. I mean, women should have huge issues about
Why do
the
you
religion.
think that Islam gets a certain protection compared to other religions? Because if we criticise, for example, Judaism, they circumcise the children. That's wrong. That's abuse. No one's going to prison for that.
Or Christianity when it comes to
anything.
abortion.
Yeah.
I think it genuinely...
Do you think Islam has got something... This is just a question. My throat. Something to do with these powers that be, and there's a shift.
I actually think it's to do with the woke mind virus. It genuinely is, and I see it all the time. And the problem is it's becoming a danger. So, for example, Brogan, recently there was an ISIS terrorist attack in Germany, and the immediate reaction by pundits on UK TV news, and I've documented this, it's all there, you can watch it for your own eyes, was to say, not, oh my God, how absolutely terrible that an ISIS illegal in Germany is literally going around stabbing people to death. The reaction was, oh God, how terrible. This terrorist attack by ISIS might empower the far right in the UK. Now, I'm sorry. That is a mentally ill response. That is the woke mind virus literally going into your brain, and you've lost all semblance of what's right, what's wrong, what you should be caring about, because the far right are not going to a music festival and stabbing your children or stabbing your boyfriend or your brother or your husband. And it doesn't make you politically incorrect to say that we have to stamp out extreme Islam terror. Of course we do.
Honestly, sometimes I find myself so lost for words in all this, with everything that's going on. And I actually have to make myself laugh because I end up with lovely people like you guys here are so educated in everything that's going on. I'm actually so in awe of everything that's happening.
Yeah, but it can be depressing, can't it?
Oh, once you fall down the rabbit hole. Yeah. But also I feel like it's my duty because we speak about it often, is that sometimes my naivety is actually my blessing because I just want to understand the root of it. And I feel that when we're talking about some of these things, that there is, like, without a shadow of a doubt, Islam gets a certain level of protection. And a lot of the people that were voting for Labour on whatever it is, what they're forgetting is that people like you would not be allowed to exist in an Islamic state.
Yeah, or Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, would be locked in her house with everything covered up other than her eyes, and yet she's appeasing these hard left extreme Islam sects because she wants to be elected. But I think, look, people do have to have a good look at themselves. What the issue is that folk are now so scared of being cancelled for being
Freezes you from doing anything.
Islamophobic, transphobic, homophobic, sexist, racist, so scared of that they go so the other way. And it's like the absolute obsession with DEI, which is now gone to such an extent that you would actually, if you watch certain TV shows, for example, you would believe that the UK was a majority black country. Now, I find that very bizarre, Brogan, because diversity to me always meant that what we see in the media should match what we see in the wider population. But there's this obsession, especially in London TV, about putting lots of black faces on. So very often, if you turn on Loose Women now, you'll see 4 black women presenting the show. Well, there's no diversity in that because let me tell you, those black women are all Londoners. They all come from a particular
community
heritage, an Afro-Caribbean heritage. And what about the Asian people? What about the African Brits? So what I'm saying is that diversity should reflect the wider population, but there has been a massive overcompensation by the pathetic mainstream media. And why are they doing this, you might ask?
Yes.
A lot of it is actually...
Just quick before we go into that, the people at ITV, and obviously you've been privy to this kind of stuff, are they all like, what is this shit? Like, we're just having to fill tick boxing exercises of what someone should look like rather than the quality of the host.
They are obsessed with the tick box exercising, though. I mean, I know so many people, Brogan, who literally have been told you are being sacked or your days are being cut down because we need to have, you know, if you're the chef, sorry, you're a white chef, we need to have a black chef. Or if you're the fashion presenter, sorry, you're a male fashion presenter, so we need to have a black female fashion presenter. Now, that's incredibly disheartening if you have spent your entire career building up a reputation for being excellent in what you do. But I also really feel for the young actors, actually, where it's very difficult. If you're a young white male actor now, there's just no desire for you. It's very, very difficult to have a career at the moment to get an agent. That isn't fair. All we should have is true diversity. I mean, I want diversity, but my definition of diversity is you match what is seen in the population. You would never go to Japan and expect to see
a load of Brits on the on
of course if you're watching Japanese TV, you would expect to see a majority of Japanese people on screen. And we have a more multicultural society, absolutely. But it needs to match that, and it doesn't match that. But why it's happening is very interesting, and it's being completely driven by the advertising industry. And the advertising industry is where all the money is. And what you've got to realize is the mainstream media is dying on its arse. So even the conservative anti-woke publications or broadcasters, they need advertising money. And these woke advertising agencies, I know a lot about them, Brogan, they have been captured by the most extreme form of hard left woke ideology and DEI ideology. And so it's the advertising agencies which are absolutely driving this push towards, I would argue, woke extremism, woke tyranny.
Yeah.
And it's only when it backfires on them that they sometimes take a step back. For example, Dylan Mulvaney, who is not a woman, promoting the Nike range of sportswear for women, which is all designed for people with breasts. And Dylan Mulvaney, with a penis and no breasts, is being given the clothing by Nike to promote. Now, that sparked a big backlash. But woke advertising agencies have completely captured the mainstream media. And the problem is that's even one of the reasons why GB News has gone much more woke, is because there was just an advertising boycott against GB News.
We're going to come back to GB News and your exit.
Yeah.
While we're on this woke mind, woke mind virus.
Yeah.
Talk to me. Furries, transgender. How do you, what are your thoughts on furries, number one, but children under the age of 16 being able to change their sex without parents' consent?
Yeah, I'm very against it. And this is something that has, I guess, been another defining issue for me, because as a gay man, there was an expectation in the world that I was operating in, which was the entertainment industry.
Yeah, technically, you should be the wokest.
Yeah.
You're an immigrant, you're homosexual.
Yeah. And there was almost this expectation that, well, you have to sign up to LGBT. And I never really understood that. And for a long time, I wanted to prove, even though I knew that the sort of gay industry didn't accept me, I wanted to prove, no. You can be gay and you can be conservative, you can be gay and you can work in the media. And I was really proud of that, because no one who was gay had ever achieved such a high position at The Sun, for example. So I was proud of that. And I very naively, I mean, this is years and years ago, I very naively thought, well, surely the gay industry is going to think this is quite a good thing, because they celebrate anyone in the left-wing media. They're obsessed with it. Even when Philip Schofield came out, despite cheating on his wife for all of those years, he was celebrated. Now, here I am. I've always been openly gay. I've never hidden who I am. And I'm working in an industry which used to be considered very homophobic. You would think they would celebrate me, right? Oh, absolutely not. I became public enemy number one.
Whoa!
And they all turned on me. Well, it started because I had written a headline about, well, I actually didn't write the headline. This is the problem when you work at The Sun. Someone else writes the headlines. But I was never that person that was like, oh, it wasn't my headline. It's like, it's on my story. It's my responsibility.
Own it, take your shit.
Yeah, exactly. And I could get it changed if I want to get it changed. And it was a story about Charlie Sheen, who at this point hadn't been named, and he had HIV, you might remember. And the headline was Hollywood HIV Panic. And the idea was Charlie Sheen had potentially infected a number of women, by the way. So this was a straight man and straight women. But that story got me cancelled, really, from the gay world, because they'd said, oh, you're harking back to The Sun's terrible approach to HIV in the 80s, which, by the way, was homophobic and was disgusting, actually. But I wasn't. It was a completely legitimate story, right? And it became a huge story because Charlie Sheen ended up admitting the fact that he was HIV and the story was legitimate. But I was cancelled, including from a charity that I was the patron of called Gay Switchboard, which is a really good organisation for young gay teenagers to call up a helpline in order to deal with any issues that they have coming up. And I had called a similar helpline when I was growing up, so I was really supportive of it. Well, I was dropped from that as a result, and very sadly,
because of the article.
Mm-hmm. And because, they had people run these campaigns, oh, we've had 100 emails. And it's like, but there are 100 emails that are all being lobbied by a particular organisation.
They're being sent from people of different email addresses as well. Like probably the same 5 people.
And they just have a template and they say, oh, send 5 emails like this. And so that was a big wake-up call for me because, number one, I realised, okay, I've now been ostracised from the quote-unquote LGBT community. Well, I'm not LGBT. I'm a gay man. And being a gay man is very different to being a trans person. They are totally different things. One is about sexuality, one is about gender. So don't lump me into that same category. That's the first thing. I think we're different. But the second thing is I was like, well, I'm never going to work for a charity again publicly, as sad as that is. And unfortunately, I would recommend that to every celebrity, especially someone controversial, but even people who aren't controversial. I mean, Fiona Bruce, who's the host of Question Time on the BBC, just the other week was cancelled by an abuse charity because she had Stanley Johnson on the show and allegations had been made about Stanley Johnson and abuse. And I was like, Fiona Bruce has worked for years for this abuse charity and she's been dropped. So unfortunately, even charities.
I've got to talk to you about the furries and, you know, everything that's going on with the children having the ability to change their sex and the pronouns. And as a gay man, as a gay man, I guess I'm trying to say, what is your views on the non-binary and children coming out as non-binary and not being able to have to identify in a certain way?
Well, my view is that we're now empowering mental illnesses. And a lot of people on this woke left would say to me, oh, yeah, but a few years ago, people would say being gay was a mental illness. And that is true.
I agree.
But it is clearly not. And I'm sorry to suggest that a human being, especially at school, should be allowed to live as a dog or a dinosaur or a cat, which is literally happening at schools up and down the country. People don't believe this because it feels too surreal to be true.
I told you about the school
it's
in Luton.
happening. Yeah.
So, like, there's there's 1,600 people in this school in Luton. How many are furries? I told you, didn't I?
Well, I know.
72.
I know, but
so
I
they're
knew because
allowed
you
to go
told
to
me.
school
Yeah.
with ears, tails,
Yes.
and you're allowed to change. Yeah. So you can be like a Doberman one day
Yes.
and then like a Yorkshire Terrier another
Yes.
day. And they're given certain privileges, which means they're allowed their phones, they're allowed to have their meals on a tray if they want.
It's insane. Exactly. And the problem is what we are also doing
Is enabling this.
Well, yeah, but absolutely. We're enabling that. But what we're
Sorry,
also doing is we're confusing now sexual fetishes with identities. And they are different things. And by the way, I'm actually very liberal when it comes to people's personal sex lives. Like, do whatever you want when you are over 18, of age, consenting adult, you go right ahead. But I am ashamed of the gay community when I see furries in leather being paraded through the streets in front of children. Or I see an LGBT, so-called pride parade, which is basically something that should be seen in a fetish nightclub. Now, that to me is not something to be proud of. As a gay man, I think that we should be part of a functioning and healthy society.
So going back to, obviously, we've spoken about your sexuality, so there's going to be no mic drop here. But in those years where it seems to appear that we're getting a lot of furries or people unsure of what their sexuality is or what their identity is, that we're looking at people really between like 12 and 16. Now, as a gay man, do you think a lot of this uncertainty can just be from finding your sexuality and then we're trying to pigeonhole it into, oh, maybe you're a fucking cat?
Yes. Yeah, but also maybe you are actually a lesbian woman, and you should not be about to take puberty blockers and have a double mastectomy that you can never reverse. I mean, I have spoken to detransitioners, including the most famous detransitioner of them all, Cara Bell, who was the absolutely incredible young woman who took the Tavistock Clinic in the UK to court. She won, then she lost, but she won eventually in the end because the Tavistock Clinic is being shut down because what it was doing was child abuse. Now, she had her breasts chopped off, extreme hormone treatment so that she can
How old was she, Dan?
It began when she was a teenager. I mean, she was an adult once it actually happened.
Yeah,
But the process happened when she was a teenager. And look, she is, I mean, I don't want to speak for Cara. You can go and watch the interview. But a lot of these people are lesbian women. And the problem is your hormones are running wild.
And then you're putting a shit ton of hormones into it even more.
Yeah.
And you understand
and
why...
it's irreversible. It's irreversible. That is the problem. And also, I've spoken to so many people who have transitioned and just do not believe it was the solution they thought it was going to be.
Did they feel like they were being pushed towards a decision?
Well, sometimes, but a lot of it is mental illness where you're looking for an answer and you think, well, you're going to wake up and it's not pretty. Let's just be honest about it. It's not pretty. Now, I guess the bigger issue that I have, though, is when it comes to the celebrity attention seekers who are changing society as a result of this. And actually, I had a lot to do with Sam Smith in his early career, and he was a very decent, lovely individual, and I was very proud of the fact that he came out when he was very young as gay. But Sam Smith is a gay man, I know Sam Smith. He is a gay man. He's like Boy George. You know, Boy George in the 80s, very camp, amazing gay performer who loved wearing dresses and loved playing with the idea of gender when it came to fashion or high heels or that sort of thing. But Boy George is a man. And the problem is what Sam Smith did, and I believe it was attention-seeking, I believe it was cynical to advance his career, which was struggling for a certain period, which is really sad because he's a talented guy.
Oh, he's amazing.
And, you know, now he's right back up there because he's been embraced. But the problem with what Sam Smith did, and I would happily have this discussion with Sam, as I say, I really like him. None of this is personal. I really supported his career. I think he's an amazing talent and a very nice human being. But the problem is because Sam Smith said, I am no longer a he, I am a they, them. He literally resulted in the Brit Awards, which is the UK's equivalent of the Grammys. You know, it's only been going since the early 80s, but for me, that's a real heritage, you know, and I loved the Brit Awards. He resulted in the Brit Awards going woke, and they no longer have a Best British Female category. And I'm sorry, I think that is disgusting.
That should be boycotted.
Yeah, I think it's disgusting. Like, number one, think of the history. Well, there's for a couple of reasons, because think of the history, the heritage of these great artists like Kate Bush and, you know, Sade and a lot of the great British female artists. And the issue is, Brogan, that very often, even in the music industry today, male artists, I mean, if you look at the charts, this is still the case, male artists still reign supreme. Now, yes, there are notable exceptions that people always point to, and obviously it's Adele in the UK and Taylor Swift in the US, and she's amazing. And so Adele will always win, but honestly, I crunched the numbers on this. I really looked deeply into the statistics because I wrote a lot of columns about this when I was at the Daily Mail. And the problem is the vast majority of Brit nominees are men. So by Sam Smith taking away the female category, he has actually engaged in a great act of misogyny. And Sam Smith needs to think about that, because if you spoke to Sam Smith, he would say, but I love women. You know, I'm not a misogynist, but he has engaged in a great act of misogyny because there is no longer the opportunity for a woman to win a best female category and to compete against other women. Plus, it just takes away the fun of it, right? Like, I don't want to see Ed Sheeran versus Adele. I loved the fact that we had a best male and we had a best female. That was an exciting thing.
But also, you forget as well, like, naturally, women have got different pitches.
Yes.
So that we should be allowed to celebrate that. It's like men and women's football. Like, men have, believe it or not, normally have got stronger powers than women and are differently built. So you don't really want to see seeing them play. But in the same breath as well, with singers, we have different pitches. That should be celebrated in itself.
But it's also a couple of other things for me. It's about language. I really believe in the English language. And by degendering the language, it's awful. Honestly, you try writing sentences that do not use he, him, she, her. It's
all got a knock-on effect, hasn't it? The way you conjugate verbs as well.
And I had a trick that I used to play. So I would speak to the wokest person I know. And I would just totally apropos of nothing, so it would not be set up in a context like this. I would just start having a conversation with them about Sam Smith. And even the wokest person I know who absolutely believes that we should all call Sam Smith they, them, and it's completely outrageous that I call him a him or a he, even they tripped up. And every single person, I've never got through a conversation with someone where they do not call Sam Smith he or him. Because actually, we all know Sam Smith is a man.
Yeah.
So let's just stop this and let's please, Sam Smith, I love you, right? No issue with you as a person, but I'm not going to completely destroy the English language because you were going on an attention-seeking binge, just like Demi Lovato briefly told us that she wanted to be they, them, but I think now you're allowed to call her she, her. It's ludicrous. I'm not doing it.
I love your honesty.
I'm just not doing it. I'm not calling Dylan Mulvaney she, her. You know, look, I will consider things on a case-by-case basis. If someone has gone through the operation, maybe, because I don't want to be rude. But no, I'm not buying into this changing of the English language.
Love that.
I'm just not.
We've been dancing around it. We can't dance around it anymore. GB News.
Yeah.
You started off with this great platform.
Yes.
personal vendetta to go out there and make change and wake people up and have all these amazing conversations like the COVID vaccine injuries. How does one end up getting cancelled, Dan, for people that are listening?
And it was so shocking as well because GB News was the anti-cancel culture channel. And they still run promos now where they say, we don't cancel anyone. We're all about free speech. And I'm just like, well, you're not.
You're full of shit.
You're not. So let's just be honest about that. But no, it was... Look, I'm over it now because I've launched my own platform and things are going really well. We're going to talk about as well. But I was really devastated because for me, GB News was not a job. It's not an easy place to work. In fact, it's an incredibly difficult place to work for loads of reasons. It's not like, when you work at ITV, which I did for 10 years, you get all of the perks of working in TV. You get cars wherever you go. You get business class flights, you get a dressing room, all of that. There is none of that at GB News. GB News is run from a basement full of mice. It's not a glamorous place to work. I didn't mind that. It was never about that for me. It was about the cause. Yeah, it was about the cause. It was about the fact that I had lost all faith in the mainstream media, and I genuinely believed that GB News wanted to be different and was going to be different. And I thought it was crazy that in the UK we had nothing like that because obviously America has Fox News, Australia has Sky News Australia. So there are these alternatives around the world. But unfortunately, what happened is GB News began as a joke and everyone just dismissed it as a joke because we had this terrible launch. And I hosted the first regularly scheduled show on GB News. I was there the first night. I mean, it was awful. Like, our cameras were cutting off and, it was really embarrassing. So they treated us as a joke for a long time. And then the problem is GB News actually started to build an audience, started to become successful. My show, by the time I left the channel, was beating all of the other news channels at night. And I was the #1 rated show on the channel.
Fantastic.
Which my boyfriend always tells me I need to stop saying because
no, why not? Keep saying it. Shout it from the rooftops.
But it was more to make the point that, goodness me, if they could cancel me, that they could
Anyone's
cancel
up
anyone.
For grabs.
Yeah, and it was a real shame. But there had been a lengthy campaign based on total lies to try and cancel me by the hard left media, who were working with a very bitter and twisted, unwell ex-boyfriend of mine from many, many years ago, which is why I have so much sympathy for
revenge stuff.
Yeah. And this incident happened with Lawrence Fox. I mean, I say incident, it's not even a thing. It shouldn't even be a thing. Like, basically, Lawrence Fox said he didn't want to shag a particular woman on air. Now, by the way, my show isn't broadcasting at like 3:30 in the afternoon. This took place at 9:45 at night. It was after the watershed. So after the watershed on UK TV, Channel 4 literally allows full nudity, sex scenes. You can say
drinking,
the
drugs,
C word, whatever you want. But on my show, because Lawrence Fox said he didn't want to shag a female journalist, and she turned it, because again, she's from the left, she's all for cancel culture. So she turned it into this terrible issue of misogyny. So he lost his job. He was sacked immediately. A long investigation went into me. The off-communists, hilariously, so I promise you can go back and watch, because people, I think, seem to think that what happened was much worse than it was. I did actually try to provide some balance to Lawrence because I knew I was going to get in trouble. So I actually said, oh, Lawrence, come on. She's a very beautiful woman. Now, you would think if someone's very upset with someone for saying they don't want to be shagged by Lawrence Fox, you would think surely some degree of balance. Remember, I'm not saying this from a sexual point of view. I'm a gay man. But she's a very beautiful woman, which she is. You would think that would be some balance, right? Ofcom claimed that my comments were misogynist as well. So Lawrence Fox is a misogynist for saying he doesn't want to shag someone because of her political views.
Are we not allowed to say we don't want to have sex with someone?
Well, you'd think so. And I'm a misogynist, though, for calling a woman beautiful. So you can actually see in that one case, even though it's so ridiculous, in that one case, I actually think you can see everything that is wrong with the wokery that we're dealing with, because he's misogynist for saying he doesn't want to shag her. I'm misogynist for saying that she's beautiful. Now, what people apparently wanted was, and you're an interviewer, so you know how ludicrous this idea is. I was having a conversation just like we're having one now. I was apparently meant to say, Lawrence, you're a terrible human being. How dare you say that?
Apologise now.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Ava Santina. I'm so sorry. You're such an awful woman, and you have gone on Twitter all the time and said you don't want to shag men, but I'm now going to apologise. I just wasn't going to do that. It cost me my job, At the time, that was an absolutely devastating blow for me. But actually, I think it's the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me, because there is a revolution happening in the media. You're part of it. I'm now part of it. People are no longer trusting the mainstream media. They shouldn't. GB News lost a huge amount of support as a result of that, because Father Calvin lost his job just because he publicly supported me. Unfortunately, it showed that they were just like the rest of them, and people are too scared
what's
now.
life looked like? Obviously, I had two questions really. What did life look like when you got cancelled? Was that
Awful.
Yeah.
Really
Can
awful.
you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, because I was cancelled. So those circumstances were ludicrous. I mean, anyone just listening to that story would think, well, that's surely not a big deal. Brogan, I had the media camped outside my house.
Stop.
This was leading BBC News, Sly News. Every time, so the Daily Mail cancelled my column, there would be a huge breaking news alert. I was on every website. They wanted me finished. They saw an opportunity because
they were waiting, weren't they?
Yeah, they were waiting because there'd been all of these untrue stories running about me, which were deeply painful because this news organisation, I mean, I'm happy to name them if you want, but I hate giving them publicity because they're so corrupt and they're so awful. They had actually gone to the police with a dossier of claims which I was able to prove were false. But the problem is, Brogan, that all takes time because of how this justice system works. The police should have just immediately thrown this out, right? It was made up bullshit. It was completely untrue. But because the police are like, oh, but, we covered up Jimmy Savile. So now if anyone makes a complaint about a high-profile person at all, they investigate. But that process takes months, it took about 6 months. Now, I was completely cleared. No further action was taken. They didn't even hand anything to the CPS to look at. There was nothing. And the issue is, by that point, you're cancelled. You're cancelled.
We were talking the other day, actually, my partner and I. It's like, all you need is that seed of doubt. And then all of a sudden, people don't unsee that.
No.
It's that one thing. And we as humans hold on to it.
Yeah. And the media certainly do. So I knew. So it's very bizarre situation to go from.
So when was that last year?
Yeah, so only last year. So
it's all quite fresh.
Yeah, no, it's very, very fresh. And it has been incredibly difficult, incredibly difficult for my partner, incredibly difficult for my family. I mean, I was trashed. I was utterly trashed. I lost this reputation that I built up over 20 years. It just all went overnight. But I'm not trying to just be like, in every negative there's a positive. I mean, it was hell. I was silenced for 6 months. I couldn't speak to my followers for 6 months because of my contractual situation with GB News.
I'm not being rude, but in the media, you don't hear from someone for 6 months, you're on to the next thing. It's like a fish chip. That's your livelihood in your business.
Totally.
But
and so
what do they say?
So painful.
Today's news, tomorrow's fish and chips. If you're not there and you've built your whole life and career around
So I was silenced.
Really sorry that happened.
I couldn't say anything. All of the most revolting things were being said about me. Lies were being spread by my enemies in the media, like Emily Maitlis and Carol Vorderman, who knew nothing. They just wanted me finished, so they were prepared to spread lies. But I guess what came out of that, the most incredible thing came out of that, is that when I was finally able to come back in March, once my exit from GB News had been confirmed and negotiated, all of these people were still with me. And they've followed me on my independent journey, which involves me having launched Dan Wootton Outspoken on both Substack and YouTube and Rumble. And it's been overwhelming, actually, because I'm like, wow, they stuck with me. And that means everything to me, because that was always who I was doing it for. My viewers who felt disenfranchised and completely let down by the mainstream media. And the response was amazing. They knew that it was a witch hunt against me. They knew that GB News had thrown me under the bus, and they've come with me now. And as I say, I've been very inspired by what I've seen. I mean, Megyn Kelly's a friend of mine. She appeared on my GB News show, but what she has done in America, in very similar circumstances, she was cancelled by NBC for an incident on air that was nothing, but they just wanted to get her. It was like she had a conversation about blackface, but it wasn't even a bad conversation. She wasn't advocating for blackface. She was talking about the fact that blackface a few years ago when she was growing up was acceptable and now it's not acceptable. And they cancelled her and they brutalised her. But she inspired me because actually now Megyn Kelly has a bigger, more powerful platform independently with her own show. She's been literally watched by millions and millions of people all across the world every day. So there's a great opportunity in what I've been able to do. But it's horrible because so many people just walk away.
And I think it says a lot about your authenticity, Dan. Do you know what I mean? People could see that you were real and you were honest in what you're doing, and that's why they've continued to follow you.
Well,
but
I always wanted to share everything with my viewers. I never wanted to hide anything, you see. So even when the accusations came out about me, you know, I went on and I spoke about them, and that was incredibly, incredibly painful and difficult because I had to speak about details of this abusive relationship.
But I think allowing yourself to be human, I mean, how many of us go through life without having a dysfunctional ex that would, I mean, do you want to line my ones up in here? I'd never be allowed to work again. I'm joking, but like no one's, your ex is for a reason. And if you get somebody with, it sounds like actually a really poor mental health and a vengeance, you can literally ruin lives. But I think, you know, out of everything that the conversation we've had today, there's a massive shift coming and people are believing less and less in, you know, big pharma, media, all of these big companies, and they're believing in more people, individuals like you. So this platform could be the best thing that's ever happened to you.
I think you've actually just made the critical point. The absolute critical point is that people, and I'm the same, by the way, so I understand this, I will only trust an individual now. I will not trust an organisation because I've been in these organisations, and the problem is, Brogan, I know what happens if you look at the media companies. So one of the reasons I was got rid of is because I wouldn't bow down to what the bosses wanted. But the problem is the billionaires are telling the bosses what they want. Do you see what I mean?
Everything's controlled by money.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And so now, and actually, social media's worked this out too. Really, people want individuals because an individual is less likely to be bought than a company or a corporation. Now, of course, individuals can be bought. We saw that over COVID. Loads of individuals were bought by Big Pharma, actually. But it's also much easier to expose an individual who has been bought. You see, it's like, oh, we can see that, you know, such and such celebrity was in this ad for Pfizer. So we know they're being paid by Pfizer. Do you see what I mean? So, for example, on my show,
I want to hear about the show. What's it look like? What we can hear?
The thing is, obviously, I have to pay the bills, but I only advertise products, Brona, that I use. Yeah. And I love that. It's like, I'm only going to talk about this.
I do the same, though. I would never, ever put anything up that I genuinely don't use, even if I've been sent anything.
Totally. And I love that because it's like, yep, the viewers know I've got to pay the bills.
So you can smell shit now. You can sniff a rat, can't you, anyway? Yeah. You know, when everyone's like, oh, my God, I'm promoting this, but have you seen this teeth whitening? Yeah. It's like, mate, come on.
Totally. So I love that. I love that authenticity. But the best thing is actually, it's just a bit like today. It's like, I had to on my GB News, you know, if you'd been on my GB News show, right, you would get 8 minutes max, sometimes 5 minutes. Then it's an ad break.
Wouldn't be long enough for, I think we're coming up to 2 hours. Wouldn't be long enough for me and you, would it, Dan?
No, that's the problem.
Sweet Jesus.
Yeah.
Come on, tell us about the show. Where can we find it? What can we expect? What's up?
Okay, so it is on YouTube, Rumble, and I also have a Substack also called Dan Wootton Outspoken, but the show is every day, Monday to Friday, UK time, 5 p.m., which is 2 p.m. Which is midday Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific, because the American audience is important. It's got a lot of the similar themes and subject matter and guests as my GB News show, but the difference is I don't have to do things for regulatory reasons anymore. So on GB News, I had to have very annoying people on who were just going to provide a contrary opinion for the sake of it. I don't do that anymore. So I have much more in-depth conversations, still talk about the royal family because that's very popular, and I have
you love the royal family, don't you?
And I have Angela Levin and Lady Colin Campbell, who are like two of my big royal reporters on there on regularly. But I hope people can get the day's news. You know, we're live.
Yeah.
It's not pre-recorded. This is a live show. It's about providing the day's news without the spin, without the bias, and without the censorship.
Honesty,
that's actually my catchphrase. No spin, no bias, no censorship. Yeah, in a way that you're not going to get on the BBC. And the other critical thing is I will regularly call out the mainstream media. which you do not see happening on TV News now.
Right,
You'll love it.
I'm going to go home and listen to it. Right, as you know, the show is called Getting There. This is meant to represent all the highs and lows of life, even though it might be a bit more like this for us. Where are you, where's there to you, Dan? Where are you heading and how's that changed since your first ever day in Fleet Street?
Well, I think the first thing to remember, and actually this is a really good thing for everyone to remember, you're only actually going to succeed in life if you have massive failures too. And sometimes that also means losing everything, because that's where you realize what really matters. And the thing is, this sounds like such an old cliche, but it's genuinely so true. When I was cancelled, you learn what really matters, who is really there for you. So for me, it was my partner and his family. It was my family, my blood relatives, and it was my friends who I'd gone to school with. You know, the people who knew me before all of this, because they knew the real me and they knew that what was being said about me was completely untrue. So I guess for me now, obviously I want to keep doing what I'm doing. Like, I guess I am still ambitious, but it's a different type of ambition, because I spent 20 years trying to climb up the corporate ladder. And actually I realized I was really bad at that. Like, people who succeed in the media are people who are good at just pleasing the bosses. You know, they manage up.
You're your own boss
Yeah,
now.
and I'm just useless at that, because I would always say, no, but I have to talk about this, or no, I'm not going to criticize this celebrity because you're mates with them. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but I guess my ambition has changed a lot. I want freedom, and I want freedom to speak out. I want freedom to produce my show, and I also want freedom to do what I need to do as well. And that's very different, because previously it was like, oh, I want to have the top rated show, and and it's not
Driven
about
by
that
numbers.
now. Yeah.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for today. I'm so excited to watch the journey unfold for you.
Thank you. It's been
Bit
so
of a
great to be
trailblazer.
here.
There is something for you in that bag. And
Do I open it now?
Oh, you can open it up. We'll cut here before I wet myself.